Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. Botswana has become the latest country to announce a suspected case of the coronavirus in Africa, even though other countries investigating have been cleared. Ethiopia, Kenya and Cote d'Ivoire, who all had suspected cases, say the test results have come back negative. Authorities in Botswana say a passenger arrived aboard an Ethiopian Airlines flight from China, adding that the individual has been put in isolation while investigations continue. So far, there are no confirmed cases in Africa, just suspected ones in Botswana and Sudan. The authorities in Sudan announced that 2 people who had visited the Chinese city of Wuhan, which is the epicenter of the virus outbreak, were under investigation. Now, in the meantime, African countries are working relentlessly to ensure that the coronavirus does not find its way into the continent. 5 African airlines have suspended flights to mainland China because of the outbreak that has killed at least 213 people there. They include Kenya Airways, Rwandan Air, Air Madagascar, Air Mauritius, and Royal Air Maroc. The airlines say the suspensions are indefinite and have offered to refund or reroute passengers who had booked flights to China. However, Ethiopian Airlines, one of Africa's biggest operators, would continue operating all its flights to China. It says it is working with Chinese and Ethiopian authorities to protect its passengers and crew from the virus. The World Health Organization on Thursday declared the coronavirus a global emergency, but said there was no reason to limit trade or travel to China. Well, back here in Nigeria, 3 people were recently confirmed dead from the Lassa fever virus in Kano State, while 2 others are on isolation following an outbreak in the state, which was said to have been brought into the Aminu Kano Teaching Hospital by a pregnant woman. 5 consultants, over 15 doctors and several other physicians were said to have tried saving a senior consultant, Dr. Habib Musa, who eventually died as it took 2 days to get a positive blood sample, which was sent to Edo State for testing. Our correspondent, Idris Dribrin, takes a closer look at the unfortunate events that led to his death.
You may call it occupational hazard, but for Safia and Murja, the death of their husband is much more than that for obvious reasons. He left his mother behind and over 10 children.
His death is a great loss to immediate family, extended family, community, and the society in general. Is a great loss to us.
Health workers at the Aminu Kano Teaching Hospital suspect that Dr. Habib and his colleagues got the Lassa fever virus from a patient that was rushed to this antenatal unit, presumed to be suffering from prolonged labor. She was rushed to surgery and later to ICU, where she eventually died. This ICU is a highly restricted area, but after a thorough process of disinfection, we were given access to the place where the first Lassa victim was temporarily isolated.
But isolation is basically 2 types. If you want to exercise negatively, you can exercise it negatively. If you want to exercise positively, that is when you are trying to protect the patient because the patient's immunity is low and your own is okay. There is possibility for you as a healthcare personnel to even infect the patient. So that is when we are calling it positive isolation. But in negative isolation, the patient is likely to infect other people.
In quick succession, 2 other doctors also died.
What we are doing is to ensure all the persons that were in close contact with one index case, that is the woman that died, and the health care workers, all their contacts are traced and then followed up.
Their deaths were eventually confirmed to be from the Lassa virus, but it took 48 hours to find out as their blood samples were sent to Irua in Edo State for testing.
The classical presentations were not there. But then if they could test the blood and confirm it positive for Lassa, then I will surrender. And that was what happened later, 24 to 48 hours later.
Hospital staff say the lack of facility for isolation could have contributed to death of the doctors.
We should have a reference lab where we can test. We have RT-PCR, we can do ELISA. We should have these equipment in all our hospitals.
Although the Kano state government says precautionary measures have been put in place, however, doctors believe that prevention is better than cure. Idris Jubrin, Channels Television News.
Away from health matters, the United Nations continues to warn against foreign interference in Libya. Speaking at the United Nations Security Council meeting, UN envoy Ghassan Salame says foreigners still continue to meddle in the country's civil war, violating the commitments made at an international conference earlier this month. He adds that reckless interference in the conflict risks making it much more dangerous. He did not name any country that was breaching agreements reached at the conference in Berlin, which was attended by Turkey, France, Egypt, and other states. But the French have recently accused Turkey of taking Syrian mercenaries to Libya. The Turks support the government in Tripoli. They accuse France of backing the government's rival, military strongman General Khalifa Haftar.
With recent developments on the ground, I regret to report that the truce holds only in name. The artillery exchanges have significantly increased in Tripoli in recent days, with an associated increase in civilian casualties due to the use of indiscriminate shelling. There are unscrupulous actors inside and outside Libya who cynically nod and wink towards efforts to promote peace and piously affirm their support for the UN. Meanwhile, they continue to double down on a military solution, raising the frightening specter of a full-scale conflict and further misery for the Libyan people. More refugees, the creation of a security vacuum, and further interruptions to global energy supplies. All of this is done in blatant disregard of Libya's sovereignty, the fundamental rights of the Libyan people, and in flagrant violation of international consensus and the rules-based international order. Oil production will soon be reduced to 72,000 barrels per day, only coming from Libya's offshore sites. The blockade results in losses of approximately $55 million per day in national revenue. As of today, the cumulative lost revenue as a result of the blockade has reached over $622 million.
The Prime Minister of Mali has announced plans for a major military recruitment drive in order to address the growing threat from jihadist groups. Boubou Cissé said the plan was to hire 10,000 new soldiers in the coming months. The Malian military is thought to have around 20,000 troops. In recent months, dozens of soldiers have been killed by Islamist militants linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. 20 members of the security forces died over the weekend during an attack on an army camp. Violence continues to spread in Mali, despite the presence of around 20,000 UN troops and French soldiers. Children who lack official documents are being prevented from enrolling in certain schools in South Africa. Now, that's according to a local news site, Ground Up, which reports that this is despite Education Department guidelines telling schools they should conditionally admit pupils where their parents are waiting for their immigration papers. South Africa attracts migrants from across the continent, with about 70% of foreigners coming from neighboring Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Lesotho. Spokesperson for the Education Departments of Western Cape and Eastern Cape are quoted respectively by Ground Up as saying they were drafting their own instructions to school and that demands for documents were irregular. Well, Let's get clarity on this story. We have joining us now our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia. Hello, Betty. Good to see you. Help us
Thank you. Thanks for having
understand.
me.
Yes, help us understand what this means for immigrant children.
Well, as you know, in South Africa, the school year is January to December, so this is coming up now, but it's a problem that's been ongoing. The issue of documentation and what is required for such children is the birth certificate for all the children, actually, and then the issue of residency permit or study permit in the case of foreign children or children born by foreign nationals. And in this case, the schools are torn between. They found themselves in the crossfire between the contradiction between Section 38 of the Immigration Act of South Africa, which requires schools to ascertain the legality of the children that they're taking into by requesting all these documents, as well as the Bill of Rights of the country, which states that every child, has a right to basic education, as well as the South African Schools Act of 1996, which says that all children are required or expected to have some form of education from between the ages of 7 and 15. So this is the problem, but even the South African, and then the issue of documentation. If you live in South Africa, you will know that the issue of especially for asylum seekers, foreign nationals, they call them undocumented. Most of them are not able to have documents. They're not able, the process is quite difficult for many of them. Or renewing the documents. When you're an asylum seeker, sometimes you get a month's asylum documents, and then every month you have to go back. So some of these children, many of whom are actually born here, but according to the law, they're not automatically citizens of South Africa because they were born here. One parent has to be from South Africa for them to qualify for citizenship documents. So they're torn between these, but the South African Human Rights Commission recognizes this as well and notes how difficult in the position paper that they presented in September last year, saying it's quite difficult for many of such parents to even get the documents, talk less of the children, but that their position is that the children, according to the Bill of Rights and the Schools Act, must be in school. And there was a case brought in by Center for Child Law that was over a circular regarding this, where some schools, there was a circular in the Eastern Cape province actually, where they said the provisions like desks, textbooks, and even nourishment or food, nutrition for children will only recognize or will cover those who have legal documentation to be in South Africa and to receive education. But a high court in Grahamstown, or Makanda as they call it now, is ruled against that, saying that they mustn't bar children from being in school. Of course, on the side, you have the social implications of children not being in school. But I remember Judge President late last year, Benege, saying that they shouldn't bar children or they shouldn't expel children from being in school, but it's and the Department of Basic Education, reacting to the ruling, also said that they're trying to review the process. But you can't look away from the social pressures or socio-economic pressures of the country as well, especially in this January, and even some locals are looking for places in school, and it's a problem. There's a fight about it, but the ruling is that those who don't have documents are still entitled to be in school, children.
Yes. Betty, thank you so much. Indeed, every child has a right to basic education. Well, that's the much we can take. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.